Hey everyone, welcome back to Christians and Culture. We're continuing our look at virtual virtue. That is, how to take Christian virtue and apply it to the online world. Today we want to talk about wisdom. Wisdom goes very much hand in hand with the few things we've talked about already in these topics. We've talked about patience, we've talked about how we speak in the online world, taming the tongue, if you will. And today we want to talk about wisdom. Wisdom is kind of the father of those other two, if you will. If you have wisdom, the other two sort of flow naturally from it. But if you don't have wisdom, you tend to be impatient. You tend to speak unwisely. Wisdom is a very important part of the Christian walk in daily life and talking to people on the street and talking to your friends, talking to your family. And therefore, it's also important when we go online. For whatever reason, when we go online, we tend to see that as not speech, as if somehow everything we've been told in Scripture about how we talk, about how we approach other people, it should end in the online world. It's a whole different thing. The Bible didn't speak to it. But I don't think that's true. I think that the Bible, the virtues and the commandments of the Bible, the suggestions on how to live and how to walk, I think they apply just as strongly online, if not more so. In fact, I think in the modern age, we often do more damage if we don't behave online than we do in the regular world. In the regular world, odds are you come into contact with a dozen people a day closely, maybe not even that many, depending on your job, maybe more. But if you're online, anyone can see you. There are posts that will sometimes get thousands, millions of views that the person who wrote it never intended for that to happen. Going viral, as they call it, whether it be a video or a post or something controversial or beautiful or just some kind of exquisite artistic talent or something like that. Oftentimes, someone will put something up not expecting it to be put in front of a bunch of people, and yet it ends up in front of the eyes of millions. We have to be very careful about what we say and how we say it, and that's where wisdom comes in. I want to go through a couple verses here in Scripture, and then we'll talk about wisdom for a moment. First, Proverbs 10, verse 13. On the lips of him who has understanding, wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks sense. Here, wisdom is compared to something that a person who, I don't know if the word intelligent is right, but someone who has common sense, maybe we should say. Wisdom is something you'll find in them. It's something they're going to have as part of their daily life, something that is coming naturally out of them. That's what it means for it to be on their lips. Wisdom is coming out of them naturally. But someone who lacks it, what does Scripture say that they get? They get a rod, they get correction. How often is that played out in our online discourse, where someone will say something a bit rash, something a bit stupid, something that maybe even at the core of it was right, but the way they said it, the way they went about it was wrong? And what do they usually receive for it? They receive a lot of hate. Now, don't get me wrong, if we speak truth, you're going to get hate from someone who wants to live in darkness. That's going to happen. You can't live your life free of any controversy, because then you've said nothing of worth. But oftentimes, a lot of the hate and a lot of the backlash that we receive is self-inflicted. We bring a truth of Scripture, we bring a right thing to the online world, but we do it in a way that maybe was intended to stir somebody up, that maybe was intended to put somebody else down, intended to put somebody in their place. I think we've all done it at some point in time. We have that one person in mind who we know is doing something wrong, and we're not going to call them out by name, but we're going to write a post about pretty much exactly what they're doing, and we're going to let them know we got our eye on you. Those don't usually turn out all that great, do they? More often than not, they end up getting us backlash, even if it's not from the person themselves, from people who read what we wrote and think that's not appropriate the way you went about that. Wisdom sometimes means we have to go in a soft manner. Sometimes wisdom means we have to keep our mouths shut when we would otherwise speak. Wisdom often takes a form that is antithetical to the online world of today. The modern online world says react now. Say whatever's first on your mind. Whatever comes to you, put it out there. Well, that might get a lot of clicks in Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, but it's not necessarily wisdom. Wisdom, it goes hand in hand with understanding. Proverbs 18, verse 3 and 4. When wickedness comes, contempt comes also, and with dishonor comes disgrace. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook. There's an idea here that from within man can come one of two things. Either we can have wickedness coming out or a bubbling brook. Notice when the deep waters are applied, it's just to the words of a man's mouth. It's not to wisdom. It's not to the wickedness. It's just the words. That means what we have coming out of us, though it will come out from a deep place, it's going to be colored one of two ways. If we come out speaking wisdom, it'll be like a bubbling brook, something pleasant to sit beside, something which soothes the heart and mind. I'm one of those people who sometimes at night I like to have like a sound machine on, and most commonly for sound machines you either have white noise or you have like rain or water running. I like the bubbling brook sound. It's very calming. Bubbling brooks they invoke senses of peace. But on the other hand, it could be wickedness. It could be contempt. It could be dishonor and disgrace. Now, we don't often go online thinking to ourselves, with whatever I'm posting, I'm going to really be contemptuous with this post, or I'm going to be really wise with this post. We don't usually do that. What happens? What we have in our heart comes out naturally. We go online and we just say whatever's on our mind. There is some benefit to that, because whatever's on our mind, that's probably whatever's in our heart as well. If we find ourselves constantly posting things which are incurring backlash, incurring strife and anger, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, why is it that this is the first thing that keeps coming to my mind? Why is it this the first thing that I keep answering people with? Why is it every time I respond to someone, it seems to just invoke more anger and more passion that I should not be invoking? Why is it that whenever I post what I think should be a good thing, maybe about Scripture or about what God says about a particular topic of the day, instead all I receive is hate? How is it that I'm going about it? Because oftentimes how we post is just a reaction. It's just whatever's on the top of our heart. The heart is what Jesus said was most important. He said it wasn't really what's going into you that's the problem. It's what's coming out of you. And what's coming out of us is often the very first thing that we say whenever we come into contact with someone. The online world is a dangerous place, but sometimes it's also a very revealing one. There's a lot of things that people have said and revealed their actual heart online that maybe they hide well when they're in person. Things they'll say when they think they have that anonymity for some reason, when they have that screen there and think it's not such a big deal. And so what's really on top of their heart comes out. It's kind of easy to hide who we are in a face-to-face conversation. We typically have a more cautious approach in a one-on-one. But online we tend not to have that. And so the very first thing at the top of our heart, that's what comes out. So when we find ourselves in situations where we're getting a lot of negative reaction to what it is we say in the online world, wherever it may be. It doesn't have to be Facebook. It can be videos. It can be how we interact with people in a messenger app. It can be how we interact with people on something as simple as comments on Instagram. But if we seem to be constantly building backlash, we need to take a moment and ask ourselves, am I speaking wisely? Is wisdom at the top of my heart? Or is something else at the top of my heart? Because Scripture's clear, whatever's there, whatever's sitting at the top of us, that's what's going to come out when we speak. What's at the top of our deep water? What's coming out of our mouth from that well? Lastly, I want to look at Colossians 4. This is Paul leaving off with the Colossians. And in verse 5, he says, "Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." Sometimes we as Christians can get a bit zealous in our online world. It's hard when we see people engaging in wrongdoing, praising things which are morally abominable, lifting up something that's promoting, a pervasive lifestyle, or I should say perverse lifestyle, not pervasive, a perverse lifestyle or a perverse way of thinking. Our instinctual reaction is, I want to go after that. But we need to remember something. The early Christians, they came to be in a world that's not all that different from our own. The Roman culture was not a culture of sainthood by any means. Much of the stuff that we see today in the culture around us is not new. It's in fact something that the Romans were doing often to a further extent than what we even see today in their time. Now, that's not to say all of the issues are exactly the same, but many of them are. And yet Paul's commendation for the Colossians was not go out and just fight everybody you meet. Take the truth of Scripture and just go beat people over the head with it. Now, Paul doesn't say hide away. Paul doesn't say don't speak up. Paul doesn't say take the truth and put it behind you. But he says be wise about how you talk to people. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. You know, you can say the right thing in the absolutely wrong way. Wisdom asks, am I getting the point across in a way that will move the heart? The Christian goal should never be to win the argument. Trust me, we can win a lot of arguments with Scripture. It's very clear in Scripture many of the things that are going on today are wrong. We could beat people over the head with it and be right. But will we have done good? Will we have reached someone who's in the wrong? We need to have our speech always seasoned with salt, gracious towards the person who's in the wrong, so that hopefully, by speaking in that wise manner, we can move them in the right direction. I think if you ask any parent how a child asks for something, very much determines whether or not that child gets it. One child who comes up saying, give me this or else, probably is not going to get whatever they ask for. But another child who comes up and says, Father, Mother, could I please have this? And maybe even then goes on to give a good reason why they should have it. They're probably going to get a different answer, aren't they? Well, in the same way, when we approach people in the online world, we need to be wise about how we do it. I'm not saying there's never a right time to have what we might call righteous fury. But more often than not, when we approach people with anger, when we approach people with arrogance, with demands, we're just going to be met with that instant shutdown. We're just going to be met with that instant wall between us and them. I'm not going to listen to anything that you say because of how you said it. We're not a whole lot different than those kids. Sure, we don't make demands of our mom and dad online anymore, or at least I hope not. But we still come about with those same attitudes towards each other. And we still react in the same way that those mom and dads do to their children. How we talk, how we approach each other matters. We need to approach each other with wisdom. You might ask yourself, how do I gain that wisdom? That's well beyond the scope of a short video here. But I would encourage you, read the Proverbs, read the Psalms, read your New Testament. Read how Paul approached those who were outside the faith. Read Acts and see how the early Christians interacted with the world. What you'll find is that very rarely were they out there decrying the evils of the day. There wasn't much point in doing that. Instead, they were out there showing people a better way, speaking in wisdom to the lost. We need to have wisdom in how we interact with each other in the online world. That's all we have for today. This was a bit longer than I meant it to be, but hopefully this is a benefit to you. And I encourage you, take some time out of your day to dwell on whether or not you're interacting with your online persona in wisdom. We still are called to reach people, whether it be digital or in person. And wisdom has to interact with both of those areas of our life. Until the next video, everyone, I'll see you later.